Welcome back to another episode of Movement is a Lifestyle. I'm your host, Ben Reuter. The purpose of Movement is a Lifestyle is to promote the ethos that movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. So we interview people in the South Hills and across the Pittsburgh area who either have interesting movement stories or are in the movement profession in one way or the other. And our guest today is in the movement profession. We have Dr. Becky Lipinski. She is the owner of Justabout Pediatric Therapy. She is a physical therapist, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about physical therapy, a little bit about pediatric physical therapy, and also about what I think you and I decided before we started recording what we're going to call baby coaching.
Right.
So Becky, thank you
Right.
for taking time to talk to Moving to Live.
Thank you for having me. It's my most exciting thing to talk about is about kids and movement. So I'm glad to be here.
I think one of the interesting things for a lot of people, especially since we're filming this as a high school and people are considering what to do for a career. I know when I went to school, I was thinking about being a marine biologist, and then I took a marine biology class and absolutely hated the plant aspect. So you're a physical therapist. How long have you been a physical therapist, and what made you decide you wanted to be a physical therapist as opposed to some other profession?
Sure. So I've been a physical therapist for 21 years. It hasn't really been a linear kind of development. It had some peaks and valleys. So back when I was in maybe middle school, started thinking about what I'd like to do. I had a friend whose dad was a physical therapist, and we hung out a little at his clinic. Thought that was kind of interesting. In high school, you mentioned high school. In high school, we had a medical mentorship program, and I spent a lot of time with who became a mentor and friend. Her name's Chrissy Ruby. She's a physical therapist. She and her husband worked in an orthopedic clinic in Monongahela. They spent so much time with me and still do 25, 30 years later, just teaching me about the profession. And I thought, well, this is really cool. Somehow I could be a teacher. I could learn about the human body. I could get really close relationships with my patients. It was just a different field of medicine than I ever thought about. And I always found the human body to be totally fascinating. So that was right within my wheelhouse. As time progressed, I went to school for physical therapy was my intent. My undergraduate degree is in athletic training. So I was a certified athletic trainer first because my goal was to work in sports medicine. Much like you, I did a little bit of sports medicine, certainly loved working with athletes, but my course took a different direction because I had a clinical and physical therapy school in pediatrics, and suddenly I was in a preschool working with children with needs, and I loved every moment of it. Somehow I got to go to work and play with kids because they say play is the work of childhood. So I got to play with kids and help with their development. I got to watch kids learn new skills. And I thought, well, this is cool. This is an actual job I could do. So when I finished physical therapy school, I've worked in different areas of pediatrics, in clinics, in homes, in early intervention. I've worked with babies all the way up to 18-year-olds, athletes as well. I've worked with athletes, student athletes for sure. And just recently, I say recently, in the past 5 years, we opened a clinic. I opened it right here in Peters Township on Valley Brook Road because there are wait lists everywhere. Now we are realizing that kids can benefit from therapy. There's a body of evidence out there that's growing every day on how we can change lives through therapy for kids. So I have a clinic that's PT, OT, and speech. We see kids of all ages and all abilities. Most diverse population you ever see is right in our waiting room. So I opened that clinic and just to do what I love and to serve a need in the community because there are wait lists everywhere. So we're helping relieve some of the burden and helping parents right in the community.
And you mentioned pediatric physical therapy. When somebody thinks of pediatrics, they don't usually think of babies. Right. But when you talk about pediatric physical therapy, what age groups are you looking at? From what age to what age can benefit from physical therapy?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just earlier I said, I wish I could see the baby the day after they were born so we could start working on tummy time. So really infancy. Parents will call me, they've been to the pediatrician, their baby's 3 months old and they're developing a flat spot on their head. That's certainly something I work with. Start working on tummy time. Their baby might not be reaching or holding a bottle, things like that. So there is certainly a need when they are babies for different things. Some babies are born with different conditions, a birth defect or something like that, that may make movement more difficult, and they seek out PT early to start working on some of those things. A lot of what we do with babies, I certainly do hands-on with the babies, but the whole time I'm doing hands-on, my role as a teacher doesn't end because I'm working with the parents. Try putting your hands here and it could help the baby with lifting their head or something like that. Try doing tummy time this way. I love talking about tummy time. a huge challenge. So certainly in infancy, that's what we would work on. I see preschoolers that maybe have a diagnosis of autism, and some motor skills are a little more challenging for them, just the way their brain is developing differently than a typical brain. It might be we're working on skipping or jumping or hopping on one foot so that this child can play with their peers well. Older teens, I might be seeing a teenage girl who's had a huge growth spurt and she's a basketball player and is now having knee pain, and we're working on some of those mechanics and building strength. So my day can look really interesting because I can work with a 3-month-old in the morning and then work with a 16-year-old in the afternoon, which makes my day really interesting and exciting.
I've often joked in the past that some people spend, or most people spend more time looking for a mechanic for their car than they do looking for a medical team from a physician, maybe a specialty physician if you have a problem.
Right.
And I know everybody is different this way, but as somebody who's in the physical therapy profession and also somebody who has children, is it beneficial for somebody who is a new parent to say, hey, maybe it's a good idea to have a session with a physical therapist to ask questions that maybe you can't get from the pediatrician, because if it's like most pediatricians, you know, they have a limited amount of time period.
Right.
And because you have a clinic, you may have a little bit more time to spend with the patient or the child and also the parents.
Right, and it's exactly true that we know that the pediatricians' times are crunched, and in a well visit they have to cover everything from hearing and vision to, you know, developing feet and the GI tract, everything. So that's why we absolutely push for physical therapy as a wellness service. We had talked about, you can certainly email me or call me at my clinic and say, hey, my child doesn't show any delays, but we're having such a hard time with tummy time. So maybe physical therapy in itself as a skilled intervention isn't necessary, but what can I do preventatively? And what I would love to do is come to your house, and I do that through a coaching model, but let me come into your house. Let me show you 3 different ways to do tummy time if tummy time is a challenge for you. So absolutely be in touch with a physical therapist. Anyone who knows me knows I love to talk. So you're welcome to call me and email me and just bounce ideas off of me. I'm always happy to do consultations over the phone with people, and we do that. I've joked that if you talked about the mechanic, which is true, we could get online and start asking for a mechanic and you can get a list of 30 of them. But say I'm having a problem with my new puppy in training, I just blast it out there to Facebook, to one of my mom groups, and I can get 20 recommendations for a dog trainer. But what if I say my baby's having a hard time with tummy time? Parents have a wealth of information, and I might get 30 comments on a different way to do it. But none of them will say, hey, call Becky. She'll come to your house, she'll show you how to do it. So I do think there's a role of physical therapists in prevention, and I'd love to be more proactive. So anybody's welcome to call me, that's for sure. But, you know, get more involved early on before there is an issue to work on.
I know one of the things that people have said before about the traditional medical model in the United States is we are a sickness model or a disability
Yes.
model, and you don't look for a physician. I mean, most people don't get yearly wellness checks. And movement falls by the wayside, whether it's screen time or other things like that. Mm-hmm. Would you look at seeing babies or young children, even without problems, as kind of a wellness, saying, hey, here are some things you can do, and maybe educate the parents or promote them that rather than plopping the iPad in front of the child to watch a show, maybe there's something else that they can do that would involve movement or activity?
Sure, absolutely. We could get very involved in the prevention model. And what if we start doing that? And just the overall supporting a family, you know, when a new baby comes home, and showing the support through a wellness team would just be a dream here in the United States. But there are so many ways, and sometimes parents are just at a disadvantage. It's a brand new job that you get no training for. You know, you get to take home this brand new baby and you haven't been trained for this job. It's one of the most important jobs you'll have. So certainly getting a physical therapist on your team is great. Getting in contact with one before any issues come about, before it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're worrying about something. Bounce those ideas off a therapist ahead of time would be really great.
I'm curious, I know you have 3 daughters.
Yes.
Do they ever say, Mom, stop being a physical therapist and be a mom, when you watch the way they move or the way that they eat or do things like that?
All of the above, yes. My 3 daughters have lots to say. They're here right now. And that's another reason why I love pediatrics. But funny anecdote is they really listen to me when I don't know that they're listening. And I remember one of my kids coming home from preschool. She was only 4 years old. And she says, hey, Mom, there was a kid W sitting, and I told him he needs to fix that because he's not working his core. I said, right on. So I know that she's listening. That's another thing that we do as physical therapists when we talk about a wellness thing. A lot of parents don't know what W sitting is.
For people who don't know, what is W sitting?
Another one of my favorite topics. So you'll often see children, especially young children, they have a lot of mobility in their joints, and they can get into this position where they sit and their legs go out to the side. Now, 20 years ago, we used to say, don't ever do that, it's damaging to your hips. Now what we're saying, I look at more, if they're moving in and out of the position, they're very flexible kids, sure. What are they not doing, though, when they're in that position? When you're in that position, you're relying on your legs to support you and for all of your balance, and your core gets put by the wayside, and it can kind of relax a little bit. But as soon as you tell that child, put your legs straight out, put your legs to the side, I call that mermaid sitting, then that core really turns on. And that is so important for just your whole lifestyle and things we don't think about. But as the child gets older, it's really important to have a strong core to sit upright in class and be able to listen, to do all the fun activities kids like to do, to run and jump and climb requires a strong core. So when I see a W sitter, I don't want to scold the child. I don't typically scold children anyways, but I don't want to scold the child, but I say, here's a different way to sit. Or why don't we lay on our belly? You can do tummy time your whole life. It's so great to get out of that posture of being forward, right, looking at screens. But, kids in preschool, I say, lay on your belly instead, when you're playing with that toy. So that's what W sitting is, and so there's my little note for today. If you see somebody W sitting, tell them to switch their posture. So I do often go into preschools as well, and I do preschool in-services to talk about different movement things for kids.
I know there's a very well-known physical therapist, Dr. Shirley Sarman, in one of her books, she quotes a couple of studies that muscle and tissue is a plastic tissue, and that you should try to avoid holding positions for longer than about 20 minutes. Is that something that parents should consider when they put their kids in front of a screen, or when they sit, or even when they're doing what you said, on their belly? Should it be limited to 20 minutes at a time or so and then move in and out of that position?
Sure. Anytime that you see a child sitting for a long period of time, you start to worry, just like you said about the plasticity and what's happening to those muscles, because our muscles and our bones and everything reacts to the forces placed on them. So if we're sitting on a couch for a really long time, every once in a while we all have to watch a movie for 2 hours, but outside of that, you shouldn't be sitting for long periods of times. Kids shouldn't. And I often tell parents, are those 3-year-olds, for example, is that 3-year-old giving you a lot of trouble? Is it causing some premature gray hair because they're running and they're jumping and they're into everything? Great. That's how it should be. They should not be easy. They should not be passive. They should be climbing and jumping and running. And they're showing you by doing that their body needs it. So some extra outside time and some less screen time is the prescription for that.
I know I've got a good friend of mine who's a longtime coach and works with older people, and his comment was, if you ever notice kids fidgeting, he has a couple of children, if you ever notice kids fidgeting, that's not a sign that they need to be disciplined, that's a sign that they probably need to move more, and their body's saying, hey, move. Have you found that either with your daughters or with your patients?
Absolutely. We used to have this rule in my house. Now my kids are super busy with activities, but if it was a Tuesday and we didn't have anything that evening, there was no dance or anything like that, I would tell them that they're actually not allowed to do homework as soon as they come home from school. And that's kind of counterintuitive. We, as parents, sometimes we get into this idea as you come home and you do your homework. Well, these children have been sitting all day. You know what clears their brain? Fresh air. I would say, nope, books away, you go outside and run for 20 minutes. And they would run and they would play and they would jump and they come in with a clear head and their body's ready to rest and relax, have a big glass of water, have a snack, and then do your homework. And it works. The brain works in magical ways like that. Sometimes when my kids would get frustrated, movement is just a great medicine for so many things. But when my kids would sit and get frustrated over, say, a math problem, I'd say, put the math away. And now they are great students, so I don't have to worry too much. But I would say, put the math away, go take a shower, go ride on the exercise bike for 15 minutes, do something, do a dance video, something, because it clears your brain. You can't be upset and do your homework at the same time. Those are competing and they can't work together. We need a calm, relaxed brain. And movement is sometimes the ticket to getting a calm, relaxed brain.
I know I've talked to a number of physicians who've said that if they're in a private practice where they have time, they often will go for a walk with their patients to take the history. Because if we're sitting across a desk, there's a dynamic where you might not be willing to tell me things, whereas if you're walking, there's the fresh air, there's the birds, there's the dodging the cars if you're crossing the road, or the cyclists if you're on the Arrowhead Trail, and you're more likely to open up and tell things. Do you find that with patients that you work with or parents? They say, when my child starts to be moving a little bit more, they're either easier to work with or they're more likely to tell me what's bothering them rather than saying, Mom, nothing's bothering me.
Right, 100%. Yesterday was a perfect example, right? We had great weather here, and so as soon as we have great weather, so many of my sessions are outside. We go outside, we walk on uneven terrain, we can meet all our PT goals, and the child gets fresh air. Just so many benefits. But I do have kids. I never work with, if a child is coming to me for a gait abnormality, I'm never working with just their feet. You have to look at the whole child. And very often, kids are like all of us, they show their emotions, and I'll have a child that's crying and say, hey, let's go get some fresh air. And we can work on those PT things, and you are absolutely right. You put a child side by side, and you walk together, and suddenly it starts, well, I had a really bad day at school, and this is why. Sometimes they just need a sounding board. And so my job sometimes shifts a little bit into that as well.
Somebody's got a child who doesn't have any things that potentially needs a physical therapist. The pediatrician says, everything's developing well, but maybe the parent is a data geek, or maybe they're watching this show and they say, I'd like to periodically bring my child in. I see a personal trainer, or I see a physical therapist. How often should they bring their child in to visit somebody like you?
Well, if a child is developing right on track and doing very well, and you still have concerns about their overall health and well-being, I would do it just the same way as I would do your well checks. So for a very young child, when babies are first born, we do well checks 6 weeks, 12 weeks, really frequently. And then as the child gets older, maybe a 3-month check, a 6-month check. And for a school-age child, maybe they're involved in sports. And sometimes I'll work with a parent to come up with like some off-season kinds of things, just some good general fitness to keep in shape. And then maybe a yearly or a pre-season checkup with a PT is a good idea too.
How do you approach parents, or what advice do you give to parents with children who are involved in sports? And so often we've had Frank Velasquez from AHN on here talking about year-round sports and how that's potentially problematic. So you've got maybe a girl who plays soccer on the high school or the junior high school team, and then they play summer soccer, and then they play travel soccer, and all of a sudden it turns out to a year-round soccer, and they may be a very good soccer player. They injure an ankle or something, they come and see you, and they're horrible at moving. They can play soccer, but they can't move. How do you broach that with the parents and saying, hey, they might make the national team, but you also want them to recognize they have another 70, 80 years where they have to rely on those hips, those knees, those ankles?
Sure, I guess just helping them recognize that there, of course, is life outside of sports, and maybe there's some cross conditioning that needs to happen. Maybe this child could also enjoy yoga, and in the off season, or just on a day off, do some gentle stretching and some yoga, swimming, biking. Just realize that there's other ways to move, because you don't want to be dependent on one mode of movement for soccer to be your whole source of movement. Are you biking on the weekends with your family? Are you going for a hike at Mingo on the weekends? And just remembering that the whole body can benefit from different types of movement. And that's really important.
Do you ever have a situation where you offer advice to the parents, become more active, your children need to become more active, and the parents say, well, I'm just not a mover, but I'll tell my child to do it? Because it really is. You mentioned your kids see what you do and what your husband do, and they reflect that. How do you approach the parents who maybe aren't active and don't recognize the importance of, hey, what you do helps your child also?
Sure, it's always a good conversation to have. And I think, though, that parents, when you start relating it back to their child, the things we won't do for ourselves, we will do for our children. So maybe you wouldn't be a mover by nature, but you start talking about modeling for your children and what they can get from it, and say, what is something you could see yourself doing? What do you want your child to be doing at your age? Walking in the park? Well, then why don't we start that, every evening after dinner? Could we just do a 15-minute walk? Can we get the dog involved? Can we go for a walk with the dog? So then start the parent thinking about benefiting the child and benefiting the family pet. And then it becomes really important to them, and then suddenly movement becomes important.
And I think what's interesting in our whole conversation, we've talked about movement, we haven't talked about working out. And I think that's a great concept to have, because we interviewed somebody on a podcast who said, well, I don't really know if I'm somebody you want to interview because I don't work out. I swim, I dance, I walk on the treadmill, but I don't work out. And I think too often we've missed the point that walk with your children at night, or that walk with your husband or your wife at night, that's movement, and that's better than doing nothing. And it might be more valuable psychologically than going to that high intensity gym class and crushing it and then coming home and wondering why your joints hurt.
Right. I agree with you completely. Yeah, just looking at it, just like you say, as a lifestyle, and just the movement of it, and what you get from it. And there's a whole wealth of information out there of the benefits you gain just by moving, by that afternoon walk and getting some vitamin D that way, and all of those benefits. And it has to be part of your whole life, to keep this body moving.
We were talking a little bit before we started recording, and you talked about how you want to get more into coaching as a physical therapist and working with new parents or even beforehand. Talk a little bit about that. You've mentioned a couple times increasing belly time, maybe for somebody like me who's not a parent. Explain what that is, why it's important, and why it isn't commonly done, or it's not done as often as you think it should be done.
Right. So tummy time, we call it tummy time, and some parents will wince at the term because they hear me say tummy time and they can hear their baby crying. We started this, not me, but the medical profession years and years ago started a back to sleep campaign, and it has done wonders for saving babies from SIDS. What that means is that you need to put your baby on their back to sleep, and that's how we're preventing SIDS. On the flip side of it, when baby is awake and alert, he or she needs to be on their belly. That's how you do the most development. You gain in all areas of development. Your gross motor, your fine motor, social skills are gained that way, cognitive skills. And you don't think about that just by placing baby on their belly. Suddenly they can see a toy over there that they want, and they have to coordinate, how do I move that arm to get there? How do I move my body? Can I see it well enough? Do I have to turn my head to get it? How do I get mom? All these things develop from on your belly. And so right away, we tell parents when they're alert, they have to be on their belly. Well, what happens is they're comfortable on their back, so they start wailing, and they don't like tummy time. But parents also know how important it is. So often I'll have parents call me and say, he just doesn't tolerate it. 30 seconds and he's screaming, and I'm afraid he's going to throw up. And we're often just told, do it. Just do it. Just put them on their belly. Well, what if I showed you 5 different ways you can do tummy time and reap the benefits of it without all the distress? It should not be a distressful time for you in helping your baby get on their belly. So they should be on their belly several times a day based on how old they are. That's how they gain the strength to push up, to start looking around, start pulling their knees under themselves. When they get a little bit older and ready to crawl, they learn to roll. They get shoulder stability. The benefits go on and on and on and on from tummy time. Visually, they start to develop their vision better when they're on their belly because they start developing depth perception, which I always think is fascinating. I went to a lecture, and there was this anecdote that the lecturer gave that babies develop depth perception around 4 to 6 months old. They develop it best on their belly because they start pushing up, and when those arms get tired, what happens? Their face hits the mat, and they say, oh, that's how far away that is. And right away, they learn how far away they are. So many benefits to tummy time, but we don't want it to be a screaming, unpleasant experience. So you call someone like a physical therapist to help you get new ways and new ideas to make it pleasant for your child.
Have you ever had scenarios or situations where you've seen older patients, still pediatrics, but older patients, and you think that some of the problems are related to maybe not enough belly time as a baby or as an infant?
Absolutely. And we start digging back into the history. So they may be coming to us for a speech disorder, a language disorder, any kind of motor skills. And we start digging back, and I start asking way back. And first they say, why are you asking me this? And I say, no, I want to know what your baby did, what your child did as a baby to move. Oh, he hated tummy time. He screamed and he cried. Okay, that starts to tell me, does he have a weak shoulder girdle? Is that why handwriting is difficult? Does he, are his speech sounds not coming along? Sometimes we think all of the tummy time they're getting, they have to work those muscles to pull their tongue back, to pull their mouth back. Well, guess what? That translates to speech production later in life. So when a baby's laying on their back, their tongue falls back, all those structures are falling back because of gravity, and they're not working them as much. So we definitely dig back and find that many times hating tummy time and not tolerating it well, we see some other things down the road that are related.
If you have somebody who you've identified that probably hasn't gotten enough tummy time, what do you do? Do you go back, maybe you get somebody who's 4 or 5 years old, do you do tummy time then, or is it too late, or is there other therapy that you need to do?
Sure, it's not too late. It's never too late for tummy time. And we were talking about older individuals, so much time on screens, you start getting this rounded posture. Maybe older individuals can benefit from a little bit of tummy time too. But I certainly have worked with preschoolers, and I've said, okay, you want to do Legos, let's do it on your belly. Let's lay down here on your belly and build and start working those muscles on the back of your neck, stabilizing through your shoulders a little bit more, working your trunk. And we do silly things. We do animal walks, all these different ways to move to start strengthening those muscles that are coming at me with a disadvantage. They're a little bit weaker.
I know there's a growing body of a type of fitness called MoveNat that I know some physical therapists have used. And it basically takes adults, and the fitness classes are doing things like walking across balance beams, climbing up jungle gyms and things like that. And when you're talking about this with children and how it can benefit children even when they're older, I'm thinking, why aren't we encouraging adults to play? You and I were chatting a little bit before recording. You go to a playground and you see the parents sitting around. So where do you work? So what do you do? So what do you drive? And very rarely do you see the parent who's going down the slide with the kid. And you can often see when the parent is going down with the slide with the kid, the parent's got a big smile on his or her face. The kid's got a big smile on his or her face. And nobody's thinking, boy, look at that weirdo going down the slide. They're thinking, boy, I wish I could do that. Why do you think more parents don't engage in the playtime with their kids? It's like, okay, you need to do belly time. Whereas if you got on the floor with your kid, or you took your dog and got on the floor with your kid, the kid isn't going to cry because he's going to be interacting with mom or dad or the sister or the dog or the cat. Why are more people not saying, this is going to be part of what I do?
Well, I'm hoping that there's becoming a shift, that there's going to be a shift. There's been this huge societal shift in how we spend our time. The world has changed more in the last, what would you say, 40 or 50 years than it did in decades before that. So hopefully that shift is coming. Hey, we can interact with our kids more if we just play. Give me a great idea. Maybe I should open my gym to adults. I got balance beams, I got foam rollers, I have a slide, we have scooters. And honestly, that's my movement all day long. I do scooters and I run and I skip and I jump, and that's how I get my movement in a day. And guess what? It is fun. It's really a lot of fun to do shuttle run races with kids at work. So I hope that parents more and more will start seeing the benefits of it, and just moving with their kids. Everybody benefits.
It's interesting. One of the things we do is we do a local podcast, and we interviewed somebody who does marketing for pogo sticks. So if you go to a basketball game or you go to a football game, and at halftime you see the people doing the crazy things like doing flips with pogo sticks, this guy is the one who hires the athletes to do it. And I remember walking in and seeing the pogo sticks, and my first thought was, can I try that? Sure. And I mean, you probably had a pogo stick when you were a kid too. Well, these are super powered ones that you pump up with a bicycle pump. And immediately when I did it, a big smile on my face, and my next question was, I want one. Can you get me one? So I have a pogo stick that periodically I go in my backyard on my patio and I bounce up and down, and it's fun. I think the take-home message with movement for kids and for adults is it's fun. It's what our bodies want to do.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that.
We've been talking with Dr. Becky Lipinski. She is a pediatric physical therapist. She owns the business Justabout Pediatric Therapy. Becky, thanks for taking time to talking to Moving to Live.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.